Hello, this is the RPG Crawler and welcome to another review. This time, I'm taking a look at an expansion for an RPG that I covered a while back, Elfking Lords of Aeus. Published by Lucid Eye Publications, who were kind enough to send me a review copy. It is available in print. But before we get into it, I'd like to take a moment to thank channel sponsor World Anvil.
World Anvil is a set of world-building tools for gamers and authors, featuring templates for articles on characters, locations, and legends, the ability to make interactive maps and timelines with the Chronicles system, organizational charts, and even random tables. It comes out of the box with support for over 45 role-playing systems, with homebrew support and more to make it easy to organize, track, and share lore between players and GMs. And all of the same techniques used to flesh out a world for gaming can be used by authors and other creatives who can build out their plots and story events and even monetize their world by offering exclusive access to sections of the lore, articles, and the stories that they write. World Anvil has a few pricing tiers suited for different needs, and right now you can get 40% off of any yearly subscription by using the coupon code RPGCrawler when you sign up with my link.
Lords of Aeus is a sort of miscellany of setting information, characters, items, glamours, entities, and so forth that can more fully flesh out a game of Elfking, as well as provide a sort of expansion to the meta-narrative of the game's world. As such, this review is likely to be relatively brief, all things considered. As always, I'll start with a quick look at the presentation, a summary of the contents, and then give my thoughts on things at the end. This review will be based on the softcover print version available through Amazon, listed as version 1.2, first printing. The softcover clocks in at just over 60 pages with a full color cover and an interior that is a mix of full color and black and white, with the bulk of the interior text being 2 columns, occasionally 1 column, and largely across background illustrations on both instances. In those instances where it appears over color illustrations, the text is highlighted in sort of yellow with a black background, and it's there where my major complaint over the entire layout occurs, but I'm going to address that later in my thoughts section. Mechanically, the text is well edited for the most part. I only spotted a few typos here and there. In terms of style, the writing has a similar sort of florid presentation that is true to the genre, and which I commented on my review of the core rulebook. It seems to have been toned down a bit here and there to make these rule sections more understandable where they appear, and I appreciate that. In terms of contents, things are a little bit scattered in how they're organized, with many of the major sections simply covering a page or two of content. There's an introduction, a map of Aeus, a section on the forging of the real realms, a tale of Orlia Hellsinger. There's sections on 2 characters, Orlia of Ryfurt and Aloysian of Wasterland, a section on artifacts and glamours, glamour locales, glamours themselves, dark glamours, pelhexes, and a section on mortal kind, a character profile on Rave the Manfey King, Reeve's weapon, a section on the Pell Witches, something on their blood pact. There's a discussion of Trollkind, the Vorthexen, stats on Redick Heg, a section on monstrous entities, and then an afterword. In more detail, the introduction just covers what this expansion includes, along with an idea that is primarily for expanding on the setting in general and primarily for the Game Master's use. This is followed by the history of the Immortal Realms, which goes over their general creation and, more importantly, the fluidity of history within a timeless land. There's a map of Aeus similar to the one in the core book, complete with general areas listed, followed by talk of the sundering that created the different realms, which are then gone into in turn. These are termed the 7 realms, each of which bears a brief description. The above contains the skies and stars. Hell is where the Hell King was banished. Aeus is the main setting where the elves dwell. The lands of the Farar are where the trolls dwell. The Underlands are a sort of underground subterranean realm. The lands afar are where the mortals live, and the other lands are basically alternate versions of the Fey realms. Next up is a brief mention of recent events in the Fey lands, which provides a sort of meta plot to start things up. There's the tale of Orlia Hellsinger, which tells of a Fey lady who became a servant to the Hell King, followed by her stats a few pages later, as well as that of an associated Fey lord, Aloysian. Each one of these is detailed in a manner similar to those within the core rulebook, with their stats, artifacts, and powers, and then some basic background detailed. The section on artifacts and glamours starts by detailing a few new artifacts that can be introduced into the game, including their name, abilities, and background, how much glare they're worth, and so on. These range from relatively minor books and scrolls to major artifacts and more nebulous items such as the Lensmorn, which are more suited for advancing certain story elements. Glamour Locales details a few locations and sites that are magical in and of themselves with background on what they do. The nature of the Feylands means that some of these might be found pretty much anywhere. The Glamour section offers a variety of new glamours, above and beyond those found in the core rulebook. They are laid out with a name, details on how much they cost and what they take to cast, and then their individual effects. Aside from some very interesting Fey glamours that offer some more thematic uses into the game, there are also dark glamours, used by the servants of the Hell King, as well as a few Pel hexes, or those used by the Pel witches. There's not much in the way of troll magic, though. In fact, I don't think there's any at all in here. The section on mortal kind starts off with a brief summary of what mortal lands might be encountered, as well as touching on information that was missing in the main book. While the core rulebook did allow for the creation of mortal characters, it didn't touch on aging and age, which is perhaps more important in a realm where everyone else is immortal and you might have ages pass between adventures. There's some talk on the reappearance of some of the old gods now dead, including Morgog, or actually specifically Morgog, which was raised by some mortal beings. The mortals section continues by talking about one group in particular, the Volfadnar, which includes something akin to berserkers, with a few who can change into wolves or bears. The leader of these people is statted out in the form of Venlin or Regwolf, but a couple of more other important mortals are covered here as well, with Wit the Fool and his tragic story, and Brux of the Out Isles covered in detail, and Brux actually runs a settlement within Aes itself. It's a settlement of mortals in the Elflands. Interestingly, the Dark Ward of Revant is described, which is less of a character and more specific type of monster that has been set out to guard the forest from local mortals specifically. Reeve the Man King is then statted out, and he serves as a sort of overleader to some of the mortals. The once changeling adopted by the Elf King himself, his sword, the Archelian Blade, is detailed as a major artifact, which is given to him in order to face off against the Hell King, but which he instead decided to use to create his own kingdom among the mortals. Gremengel, Earl of the Vorlings, is statted out as well, although this fellow is more of a surviving lord of a defeated group of mortals, basically biding his time. The book then goes on to the Pel witches, which are the mortal witches which use their magic to advance their own ends. A few of them are detailed and statted, including Dread Abeletho, Skegni the Witch, or Skegni the Hag, as well as Vidley the Blood Hag and her servant Pit the Spritan. Once more, each is given stats, relevant abilities, and artifacts, as well as their own motivations. The section on Pel witches finishes with a mention of their blood pact, which lets the witch sisters tell of the general fate of others within the pact, not necessarily so that they can come together, but just so they can stay informed. Trolls are gone into here, with mention on how the Farar Enfer trolls have aligned with Hell due to the presence of Helson Oloma. A couple of troll lords are then detailed, Grang Elf Troll and then Kufnir the Betrayed, neither of which is particularly high in status, but useful for low to mid-range antagonists. The Vorthexen are then introduced and serve as a sort of undead elf. They were cursed and consumed by blood and destruction in very ancient times, and now ride out of a kingdom to herald the end of days. Their leader, Hirahale Bloodmother, is detailed, as well as her weapon, the Aeon Thorn, a sort of artifact spear. A general of Vortex is then statted out just to use as kind of one of her servants. Reddick Heg is then described in brief. It's just basically the point which allows the contact with the Blood Sisters in their lair, and then the Guardian Gull Dogs are then statted out because you're likely to encounter some around that area. A few general monstrous enemies then round out the book, offering a few new monsters to face against, and the afterword just closes the book out. So, Lords of Aes, what are my thoughts on this one? Well, in terms of presentation, I am on record in my review of Elfking stating that I did enjoy the artwork and layout of that book, and that remains much the same, except that I will bring up a few concerns here. Now, as I mentioned previously, the text on the full-color illustration backgrounds really does bring up my main problem with the book, and this is more a personal thing, but the text on the full-color illustration backgrounds is difficult for my old man eyes to read in some instances. I didn't have this hard of a problem in the main book, but then in that core rule book there weren't quite as many instances where large amounts of text were presented on a full-color background. I don't know if it's the fonts or the color scheme or just the way the text is set, but generally it did make it hard to read in some segments, especially here where you've got yellow on on a greenish background, and it just kind of blurs together under my eyes. I'm also not totally sold on the way that the sections were divided up, or actually more specifically, how the sections were referenced in the table of contents, because they're actually divided up relatively well, which is difficult with a miscellany like this. The creatures and NPCs and such divided by type. It would have been more easy to divide them into, say, settings, lore, and history, and then locations, then Fey Lords and Hell Lords, mortals, Pell Witches, trolls, artifacts, and glamours, bestiarius area, and divide them by type rather than where they lie in the story. I understand what they were going to here, but that makes this just seem like a kind of a semi-random selection of headings rather than an actual guide to the book, and it does make it overall harder to navigate until you've actually been through the book, and then it's easier to navigate. Again, it's just nitpicky, I'll admit, and some of these, I'm just saying it might be a little bit better to navigate in that instance. I do like the way that the art is a little bit high-res. I should say illustrations are a little high-res. Now, that actually brings me to my final point of concern with the overall presentation. It was pointed out to me that there is machine-assisted imagery within this book, but no real indication. Or actually, it was machine-assisted imagery in the core book. I don't know about this book, although since the style is very similar, I've got to assume that it's pretty much the same. There's no real indication of it in the credits or anything. I may believe this may still be the case, as I said. As back here, at least in the printing that I got, there's a note here, edit out teeth of Abavent, because apparently they generated it and they needed to edit the teeth out, but they left it in. But that's the kind of thing that you see with I guess, AI illustration. I don't particularly have a problem with machine-generated or machine-assisted imagery being used. I actually think it's a very, very nice thing to help relatively low-budget companies get off the ground. I think that it takes a lot of work to actually make it look cohesive rather than just an info dump, and this definitely looks cohesive. But with the way copyrights are evolving and other requirements are noted, it just behooved to mention. Or better yet, credit the artist that's doing the editing. Because I know that in the US it was recently determined that a human hand has to actually, do something to make it copyrightable. I don't know how things are in the UK or Lucid Eye is based. Not a lawyer, not advice, just saying, maybe credit some sort of artist just to save you some trouble in the future. As for the content, the actual reason that you'd get the book, the lore and the other details, I actually really like it. While there are a few rules here and there for particular items, and of course plenty of stats for creatures and NPCs, it is definitely more lore-based of an offering than maybe another core rulebook expansion. The way that things interplay, the dark fairy tale style of writing, I really enjoy it. And I love the way that the NPCs and items expand on the world, not just through explicitly stated material and stories, but also through their descriptions and the way that they interact. And that reminds me vaguely of the Computer Soul, or I guess it's console as well, Computer and Console Soulsborne series, where in terms of storytelling, where they put like a little description on an item and then you piece together fragments of a disjointed story that way. I appreciate that. I don't know if they were inspired by that, but there's certainly some element of that in there, and it's very fitting considering that the Real Realms are also a land where time doesn't follow the usual flow of things. So that really, really does help to the story. The story of the Man-Fae himself has me a bit interested as well, and I would love to see where that metaplot goes in the future if it's allowed. The Vorthexen are creepy and a very good addition, although I'd love to see more about their background going forward, because they just basically got a bare minimum influence in here and like an introduction, and then that's it. In fact, I've got only 2 comments beyond this in regards to the actual content. The first is that I'd love to have seen more of it. 60 pages worth of material is just fine, really, but for a proper expansion that details things out, I can't help but think it would have been good to flesh out a few more pages worth of stories detailing some of the NPCs, especially the mortal ones at the very least, because again, there's fragments of a very good story in there. The second comment is that I have is that even though it's called the Lords of Aeus, like the vast majority of the NPCs and lords were not actually of Aeus, despite expanding the setting. And I appreciate that they have expanded the setting. And I understand that the Lords of Everywhere but Aeus doesn't really have that kind of same ring to it. But maybe some additional elf lords or NPCs might have helped balance that out. Overall, though, Lords of Aeos I think is a worthy expansion to the Elfking setting overall and really builds upon it. And if you've become interested in any of the meta-narrative from the core rulebook, it will definitely add a bit more to work with in that regard. If anything, it may whet the appetite for even more material for this setting produced in adventures and other things. On that note, I will wrap things up here. This has been the RPG Crawler with Elfking, Lords of Aeos. I do have a couple adventures I'm going to go ahead and review pretty soon. They'll probably be combined into one video. I'll leave a link to where you can pick this up below, as always. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment on any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.
And if you are still watching, I would like to take the opportunity to thank my supporters, the top tiers of which are listed on the screen, without whose support I would not have been able to offer the variety of content that I have on this channel throughout the years. If you're feeling particularly generous and would like to join them, you can support the channel. There are a variety of options to do so. I have a Patreon, a Subscribestar, as well as channel memberships enabled. If you are not in a position to contribute, simply leaving a like, a comment, or sharing my videos are all wonderful ways to help the channel grow without spending a dime, and are all greatly appreciated.